sitting there, and the president goes out and she's now, I guess, 8 or 9 years old. He just picks her up in his arms like a grandfather. Right? And she's squealing with happiness. And then he carries her over to, and he motions to the family to come, carries them over to, to where we all sit. And this little girl, this 8-year-old, sits in the chair next to the President of the United States. And they're just having a conversation, and she shows a picture she drew of him. And, it's all over, and then they tell their story to him, and then he invites the press in. And then when he invites the press in, he says, it was one of the most emotional moments he's ever had in the Oval Office. I mean, hearing their story, how they survived, and what they're doing now. It was just for him an incredible, incredible moment. And I tell that story because I think it's important in terms of, and it's kind of ironic because I can't remember the name now, it's important in terms of the points that both Nick and Roberta made about personifying the problem, the human rights problem. I mean, North Korea would like the human rights problem to be nameless and faceless, as Roberta said. When the Chinese take North Koreans and put them on, that escape, and put them on buses to take them back into North Korea, they draw all the curtains, so nobody can see them. And so if it stays nameless and faceless, it's sort of an abstract policy problem. Nobody can relate to it. But if you add names and faces, stories to this, just like the story about South Korean democratization was Kim Dae-jung. There was a name, there was a face, there was a story you can attach to it. I mean, that's a very important part, I think, of how to deal with this problem with regard to human rights. In terms of U.S. policy, I don't think human rights has been very well integrated in U.S. policy when it comes to North Korea. We have been dealing with the nuclear problem and trying to engage North Korea on it going back actually to the Reagan administration. But that has not been the case on human rights. As all of you know, there have been 2 agreements with North Korea. In 1994, the Greek framework. In 2005, the joint statement, the 6-party joint statement, neither of which really deal with human rights at all. They're all about nuclear weapons. The 2005 agreement, which I participated in, did have as a part of it a bilateral working group between the United States and the DPRK, where we were going to address issues of mutual concern. So the North Koreans had their priority list, which started with sanctions. And we had our list, but our list really was, aside from nuclear problems, missiles, right, the conventional military balance, and then maybe human rights. Right? So even in our bilateral discussion with North Korea, it wasn't well integrated. The Obama administration really hasn't had much of, they've had a strategic patience policy with regard to North Korea, and they had this recent agreement at the end of February, but that also did not explicitly deal with human rights, although it did offer food as part of the deal. There have been 2 human rights envoys for North Korea. The first one was Jay Lefkowitz, who was a part-time envoy and had a difficult time doing his job, in part because he was also dealing with a South Korean government that was not really willing to press the human rights issue with North Korea because of a different sort of political agenda. And the current human rights envoy, Robert King, who is full-time and has been trying to use the humanitarian issue as a bridge into the human rights issue. And I guess we can discuss whether that is the right approach. But I would say at the presidential level, and I have nothing against President Obama because, as I've told some of you, my students in class, I went to college with him, so I have nothing against him. Even though I worked for President Bush. We graduated same class at Columbia College in 1983. He's done a lot better than I have. But I don't think the human rights problem he does not have the same passion for it that the previous president did. I mean, I think the previous president did have a passion for this and would constantly say he wants to do something to measurably improve the lives of North Koreans. And while there are many flaws, you could argue, with the previous president's policies, I think that was genuine. I think he really felt that. So I think the United States should make human rights a part of its policy in the sense that many things I think that Roberta laid out, that those 10 things should become part of the deliverables we seek from North Korea in return for the conventional sorts of things that we've offered, whether it's starting from food or oil or energy all the way up to political relations. It seems to me that this should be a part of our policy. You know, cynically you could argue because we're not getting anywhere on nuclear. You could perhaps even argue we've lost the nuclear battle. But having said that, I understand that there are clearly practical problems of integrating human rights into U.S. policy. One of the biggest practical problems is synchronizing it with South Korea, right? Because we are about to have an election in South Korea. There's a pretty good chance it could be a progressive government in South Korea. And I think for progressive governments in South Korea, the human rights abuses issue with North Korea has been a very difficult issue for them to deal with. So one of the practical problems in the U.S. pushing this is it has to be synchronized in some way, or it has to be managed in a way that you can get a Korean government on either side of the political spectrum to be supportive of it. The other, I think Sarah's points about economic engagement are very important, but I think there are also practical problems of implementing an economic engagement policy with human rights. And if we take the example of Kaesong, for example, Kaesong was a very important project in terms of improving relations between the two Koreas and as a way to try to get economic reform into the country. But as some of you know, who've looked at Kaesong, you know, there were problems in the sense that the money that was being paid by the South Koreans into the North Korean Kaesong project was not being paid to the workers. Right? So that creates a human rights problem, which can sometimes bump up against the economic problem. So how do you balance those two? And then the third practical problem, and this is something where I think right? Other groups think and other groups can be very helpful, is that you know, this issue has not generated the public interest that it should. I mean, you think about Tibet, think about other sorts of issues where it has really animated the general public and the way the public thinks about it, and we don't have that with the North Korean human rights issue. We don't have people, celebrities, taking up these causes. And I think that's a very important part of consciousness raising that also puts pressure on governments to do more. With regard to the future and the political change of leadership, I mean, we can discuss this. I would simply say that we, as Sarah said, we know less about Kim Jong-Un than we knew about Osama bin Laden, or Saddam Hussein, or Muammar Gaddafi. So it's really difficult to say what direction he'll go in. I think all the indications are, you know, I wouldn't put my bets on any major change right now. We met with the North Koreans in Track 2 Dialogue a couple of Saturdays ago in New York, and some of the people there, you know, were from their foreign ministry, people that we had negotiated with during the previous administration. So, you know, everybody's happy to see each other. How are your kids? All that. And then during one of the coffee breaks, I just said, you know, so and so, I have to ask you one question, and I hope you don't take this in a bad way. And this person said, sure, ask me anything you want. He said, so is it any different now? And this person said, what do you mean? I said, you know, now that you have a new leader, and now that the dear leader has passed, and do you feel any difference in the foreign ministry? And we had just had a very casual conversation about iPads and all this other stuff. And immediately, sort of the casual conversation, her face went blank, and she said, no, nothing's changed. And I think, you know, that's all we have to go on right now. Nothing has changed. And in fact, things could get worse under this new leadership. So I think we all better fasten our seatbelts and pay very close attention.
When Korea and South Korea reunify, that their economic strength will be exponentially stronger. But I was wondering, how long do you think that would take for them to recover from, I guess, conjoining their economies and such? Is this to a specific speaker or anyone?
How long will it take? To answer that question, I don't know, but it will probably take a long time before, maybe a generation, until the two Koreas can actually say that their economy is doing much better with numbers to prove it, right? But I mean, just to give you an idea, I think it was Rand Corporation who estimated that reunification will cost approximately 10% of South Korea's GDP, and that's a lot of money. And so it's going to cost a lot for South Korea. So for the short run, I would say, at least a decade or so, the economy is going to be struggling a lot to conjoin it. But I don't know how long it will take.
Hi, I'm Kevin Sullivan. I'm member of Think. I have two questions actually. One hopefully can be answered quickly. You mentioned channels for economic improvement in North Korea. What channels are there for microfinance? Are there channels for microfinance? And who are they available to? And then to Professor Cha, my question would be, recently there was a measure passed for food aid into North Korea for inspection of the nuclear facilities. I don't want to talk about the semantics of it all, but the idea of it, does it serve U.S. interests? Does it serve North Korean interests to be connecting food aid with nuclear inspections?
Well, actually, I can say a little bit on the microfinance thing. I think actually once when I had to go to North Korea for another purpose, but on one evening, the United States has no diplomatic representation in North Korea, so our protecting power was Sweden. And I called up the Swedish ambassador for my guest house, and I said, it was Mats Foyer, and I said, Mats, help! I'm like bored out of my mind sitting in this guest house. And he said, why don't you come over, right? So I went over to his residence, and he had a few people over for drinks. And one of them was this couple from New Zealand who were doing microfinance in North Korea. And so I said, they were telling me about how they would basically do the equivalent of Costco runs to the border in China, and then drive back on weekends and things. And so I asked him what they did in terms of microfinance, and he said it was really basic stuff. It wasn't really it was basic accounting, basic inventory stuff. That's what they were teaching them. Basic academic skills more than anything else. That's my story on microfinance. On the recent deal, it was controversial in the sense that there are a lot of people who believe that the United States should not be directly linking food aid to the nuclear program. A very outspoken critic of this is one of our own here, a former USAID director, Andrew Natsios, who wrote for us in a column as well as the Washington Post, how he thought this was absolutely the wrong thing to do, because you create all these perverse incentives for them to grow more nuclear weapons if they want more food, essentially. I think the administration would tell you